Joining us today, my name is Christy Wodak, and I'm the Education Outreach Director here in Traverse City. And we've got a pretty nice crowd today. We have Northport High School on a field trip. So they've been cruising around. I'm looking behind me because I've got art behind me. They are looking at the Youth Art Show. So that is just opened up this week. I cannot encourage you enough to come and visit the show. If you are in the area, please stop by and see this exhibit. It is art from K through 12, and I pretty much tear up every time I talk about it. It is a really amazing show, and it's something that you need to come and see in person. Today we are joined by the Northland Weavers Guild, and they are here to talk about the guild, some projects they're working on, but a collaboration that they're doing with other weavers in the state of Michigan. And the timing turned out really nice because we were gifted, and I say we, Crooked Tree Traverse City was gifted a loom from, oh my goodness, what's the name of the school? I'll think of the name of the school. I feel bad that I'm forgetting that right now. The Terry and Marty, who I'm going to introduce you to in a minute, were very generous to offer to help us get that loom set up. And throughout our conversation this morning, you'll learn how you can come in and check out the loom. So I'm going to turn the screen over to Marty and to Terry, and I will be using some of my very technical Zoom skills. I'll zoom in as we're showing some pieces, so bear with me.
Hi, I'm Terry Tarnow, and I'm here with Marty Fox, and in the fall of 1973, we had just met a little bit before that and found out we were both weavers. We decided that we needed to form a Weavers Guild, and so we did just that. And we originally met at the Northwestern Michigan Artists and Craftsmen, which was above Kilwin's Chocolate in downtown Traverse City. And actually, we've come a full circle because that organization became the Traverse City Arts Center, which then merged with Crooked Tree. And so here we are back kind of where we started. There were about a half a dozen of us who founded the Guild, and I still have a copy of the newspaper article that was in the paper in the fall of '73. And we had maybe 15 to 20 people come to the meeting. Unfortunately, many of the founders were even then older women, and they're no longer with us, but they were certainly a big part of helping get the Guild started. So originally we were the Northland Weavers Guild, and I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, we became the Northland Weavers and Fiber Arts Guild because we realized that we had knitters coming to meetings, and we had surface design people coming to meetings, and felters and spinners. So we wanted to then encourage all of them to be, to feel welcome. And most of us who started out as weavers now do everything. If it, I kind of say if it's cloth or fiber, I do it because I like it. Over the years through our guild, we have many of us are members of the Michigan League of Hand Weavers, and they have conferences usually at Hope College every other year. They have exhibitions. One of their exhibitions was at the Denos Museum about 5 years ago. And many of us are also members of the HGA, which is Hand Weavers Guild of America. So we have lots of connections, not only in the state, but in the country. And we meet the third Thursday. Yeah, the third Thursday. We have been meeting at the Senior Center. And certainly you can just go online and Google Northland Weavers Guild and it comes up and you can sign up for our newsletter. And we're considering other options for places to meet for our meetings, but that's where we meet right now. Our next meeting is actually next Thursday at the Denos Museum. There was a conflict for last night, so we decided to switch it. Going to look at the exhibitions there. There's some fiber work in their regional juried show right now. And the other exhibitions they have there were interesting to us. So we'll be meeting there at 5:30. And certainly anyone who wants to come to that meeting is welcome to come. As I said, we do lots of things. We have workshops here in Traverse City. We bring in weavers or fiber artists from not only Michigan, but all over the country to teach us workshops. And so we have brought some things that we can show of what we've done at our workshops. As I said before, we all dabble or even more than dabble in almost anything fiber related. And in a little while, we'll talk about the 2 looms behind us. As Christy said, one was donated to Crooked Tree and Marty helped put it together and warp it. And then we have another loom, and I'm going to let Marty talk about the project that's going on that one.
The Michigan League of Hand Weavers every year puts out some samples for all of the members. And every couple of years, each guild is asked to weave the samples. That involves deciding what to weave, warping the loom, which is lots of fun, threading it, and then getting members to come in and weave. And we have to weave about 300 samples that are going to be 4 by 4 inches when finished. But it's always interesting to see what other guilds come up with. This year, we've decided to weave a double weave. On the surface, it's one weave, and then on the bottom, the colors are going to be a little bit different. We had in mind weaving like a Chanel type jacket fabric, and it's an interesting weave structure. We used 3 different types of threads for the warp. One is wool, one is a rayon, and one is a multicolored sort of a slub. So we've been just starting on that project. On the Crooked Tree loom, I just put on what I call a rag rug warp. It's cotton, it's a fairly thick and strong warp. I brought some rags in. If you wanted to weave with rags, you could. You could also weave with cotton to make a towel. So it's going to be kind of a fun thing to do. That loom does have a personality. The brake doesn't always work, so oops, it might just jump forward on you. The handle to wind the warp was missing, so I cobbled something together. I also brought a variety of different looms, and you can weave on anything practically. You could weave on a branch with just stringing the warp and taking seashells or driftwood and putting it in your warp. So you don't have to have a loom. Michael, could you bring over a couple of the examples?
You want to start with the Inka Loom?
Yeah, why don't we start with the Inka Loom? An Inka Loom is just a basic loom that you can weave bands like for a guitar or a belt or trim, and you just lift up the strings and then push them down and pass the weft through to weave. And last night I warped this up, and it's something you could sew on a pair of jeans, or you could put on a towel, or I'd like to put beads on it and get a little interesting. I do have some examples over there of things that I have woven for bookmarks with the Inka Loom. So Okay,
How do you, send a visual person, how do you spell that? What if I were looking that up?
Inkle,
Oh,
Inkle,
okay, so like
Inkle.
Inka with an I. Okay.
So a number of years ago, our whole guild did Inka Looms. And we had a pattern and they're pretty easy to build. As you can see, you just need some wood and dowels. And my husband actually built me one using his broken hockey sticks. Yeah, it was really very colorful and nice. And as you see, it weaves a band. So as Marty said, they can be used actually as a necklace band or decoration on the edge of a garment. Or bookmarks, and I think there's more examples.
Yes, or purse handles. That's one of my favorite things to do. Also, sometimes on a rag rug, I don't like fringe because they grab your toes if you're walking. I put a band along on my rag rugs just for security. I don't like fringe. I don't like braids sticking out on the floor because I will trip on it. I know myself. Michael, could you bring another type of loom? Maybe the cards? Oh.
This is a basic.
Many of you probably have woven on a potholder loom with sock tops. You just cut the sock tops. This is a very primitive loom, but you don't have to weave potholders. That's kind of boring. You can also weave just little things to sew on jackets or, so this is my potholder loom. That's the way I learned how to weave when I was like in the second grade.
Me too.
This is a modern rendition of just a frame loom. It has notches along the top. It's something you can sit in the car and weave. I've used this quite often. I think I have an example of my tapestry of the trees. Yes. I wove the trees on this little tapestry on this loom because you could, and then I sewed it, I cheated. I sewed it on a background. And when I do a tapestry like that, I like to weave something on the back so you don't see the Sims underneath. It's not, so I haven't finished this one yet, but it's fun to just sit and weave something like this. And it's a very, very basic loom. And I weave with a needle. I tuck the nasties in the back so you don't see them. Okay.
I know what I'm doing.
This is a frame loom. You can make one very easily by just taking a picture frame, some nails, and stringing it up. And I like to use a fairly strong warp with the long thing, the long strings, and then weave the top and the bottom to secure it. But this is very, very basic frame loom weaving. This is like an Inka loom. It goes up and down. It's a hole and slot loom. When I used to teach high school, and we would make our own looms out of popsicle sticks. I would drill a hole in the popsicle stick and then the slot. So it's a slot and hole loom. Again, very basic. Or tape loom. Whoops. Whoop. Okay, the cards. If you collect coasters, you can make your own cards. This is card weaving. And you can string the cards. They have A, B, C, and D. You make holes. You string the threads through those, and then holding the cards together, you can rotate the threads to form sheds to put the thread through, and then you can rotate it back to control patterning. This is a little more complicated than an Inka loom. It's treated like a backstrap loom where you attach one end to a doorknob and one end to your belt and use it as a tensioning device. But you can make these out of just, a cereal box with holes in it. And there are many books, if you go online, you can look up how to weave on cards. It's kind of a fun thing to do.
How's that spelled?
Pardon?
How do you spell it?
Card.
Card. Okay.
Card.
So I was on
I mean, I think this is much trickier than what it is because it looks
Yeah.
trickier.
Yeah. Well, I was on a cruise up in the Canadian Arctic, and I knew there was going to be some spare time. So I took cards with me. As you see, they don't take up any space. And I'd hook up one end to the porthole and then sit in a chair and back myself up to get the tension. And by the time I got done with the cruise, I had woven 2 lengths of warp. So that was lots of, so that's a really nice thing to take for traveling.
Okay. Does that do it with the looms?
I'll get some, okay. Hold that.
Terry's going to show us some of the things that she has been working on lately. And this is done on a 4-harness loom?
Yes, so the looms behind us, this one has 4 harnesses. So in order to weave, first you have to wind the warp. Those are the threads that go from front to back. And so that's done separately. And most weavers don't put on enough warp to weave one project. You put on enough warp to weave many projects because it takes longer to warp usually than it does to weave. But there's a saying that says you have to be warped to weave. And that's true. So I know a lot of weavers who often, while they're weaving on a project, they take a break, they go and wind their warp so that when they're all done weaving one project, they've got a warp ready to put on the loom. Or some of us cheat now and then, and you leave enough warp threads hanging at the front of the loom after you cut off a project, and you just tie the new warp threads to the old ones, and then you just wind it on.
That's what I do.
Yeah, I do that too. So the most recent thing I wove was I had this multicolored, kind of rainbow colored, what did I figure out it was? Oh, it's wool. And I put that on, I think it's about 19 inches wide. And I actually put 2 black stripes in to kind of break up all of the rainbow colors, and then wove with a black mohair, except on either end. On this one, I had this funky fringy yarn, so I put in some of that. This piece is done in what's called plain weave. So plain weave is just over, under, over, under, over, under. But on a loom, it's easier to do it. And Marty will show you, we have the foot pedals called treadles that you push, and it will raise every other thread. And then you weave across, and then you pull the beater. And then you change to the other shed that opens and you weave back. So it goes much faster than obviously taking a needle and going over, under, over, under. And so I wove one, which is here, and then I wove a second one. And this time, rather than having those little fringes stick out, I just let them be beaten in. And the fringes on here, I twisted so that they're a nice finish. I just haven't gotten around to doing that on the other ones yet, but it's a really nice way to finish fringes, and then they don't get tangled and gives a nice finished edge. So this is, I would consider this a pretty basic weave. If I was teaching a weaving class, I wouldn't hesitate to have a student weave something like this because it's a pretty simple weave structure. And then we've both taken classes, well, we both have examples that we're wearing in more complex weaving patterns. So like this one,
That's Shibuya dye.
first I dyed the yarn and then I warped the loom, and I won't get into the technical issue of it, but can you see how Marty's is gathered? So in Marty's, what is the warp on that one?
I think it's a bamboo.
Okay, so
It's very drapey.
so it's a bamboo warp. Actually, I think mine's bamboo also. Bamboo warp, and then her weft is something that's acrylic, whether it be nylon or Orlon. Is that sewing thread?
This is polyester sewing thread, because when it's heat set, like steamed for 45 minutes, I pulled the threads when I wove it, I put some pull threads in. So I pulled those threads and I steamed it, and those, as you can see,
It leaves
it's
a pleat.
crinkly. It pleats it, and I don't iron this.
So
But-
that's when I said it's a more complicated weave. You have to warp it differently, whereas in mine, we both might warp it the same way and we both might thread it the same way. But in Marty's case, because she used a synthetic, when she did the pulls and then she steamed it, it stays in. In my case, it was bamboo, and after I did the pulls, I over-dyed it in this darker color, and that's what gives the pattern. And I'll show you an example of how that can look in other pieces.
And I dyed the warp before I wove on this. I laid it out on a table outside with a mask on, because the dye we use, it's a Procyon synthetic dye for bamboo and cotton and other fibers. And I do it outside in the summer. I'll warp, I wind the warp, and then I dye it, and I let it sit for 24 hours. Then I rinse it outside, because I don't like to use dyes in my kitchen. It just wouldn't work safely. Terry has a studio where she has a whole dye set up, and her looms are all in your studio. So maybe you should talk about your studio a little bit.
Well, I got lucky. We moved into a new house in '07, and it had been actually a triplex, and in the lower level of the house, there was an apartment. And so I was able to take the whole kitchen, dining, living room area of that third space and turn it into my my studio. So I have a stove and I have a sink and spaces for my looms. So as opposed to my old house, I was running up and down different floors, and I did have to do the dyeing mostly in my kitchen, which I had to be very careful about. But the same technique that we were just showing, so I did two pieces a number of years ago. Both of these were on the same warp. So the warp started out white, and again, it's that same pulling. And so when I pulled this, you still get white in the background, but then I over-dyed it in a blue. And this is actually a Jewish prayer shawl. And I wove the band on a little loom that I have with an inlay for the Hebrew. And it says Rikma Bat Moisha, which means, my Hebrew name is Rikma, which means beam of a loom, or it also means will live a long life. And Moisha was my father. But this was the same warp for this one, this shawl. So in this case, I took it off the loom, I dyed it the green, And then I gathered it and I overdyed it in black. And on the warp, on the fringe, I tied little knots here and there so that some of it would be green also in the fringe. So I was really pleased with the way these turned out. And then for two years in a row, we've had, through our guild, an indigo dyeing workshop. So indigo is a natural dye, and we've done it during COVID, once in the backyard, and one time it rained, and so we did it in my garage, and everybody wore masks, so we felt very safe. And this was one of the projects that I did, a shawl, and it's a little heavier than the other ones. It's got kind of a cotton boucle as the weft. So the weft, again, are the threads going this way, and the warp are what's going this way. This was overdyed with indigo. So we have a lot of fun with, we've done a number of natural dyeing workshops. You want-
Michael, could you bring the purse in my blanket? I could talk about. This is something called eco dyeing, where we made the wool out of just fleece, and then we took plants. I think that's eucalyptus leaves, rose leaves, different leaves, wrapped these up, tied it in string with the leaves, oops, I'm sorry, with the leaves in it. Did we boil this?
Steamed it, yeah.
Steamed it above boiling water for a long time. And then the leaves transfer, certain leaves transfer better than others. The orange string that I tied it with also transferred, luckily, which I kind of like. But you can use certain plants really transfer well. And one of our members teaches this, and she's an expert felter and dyer when it comes to doing things naturally. This was a workshop. There's also a pocket inside. There's a way of doing that if you are making felt things. Many of our weavers are also spinners. And there's a group over in Benzie County that gets together once a week, and they spin and spin and spin. Well, guess what? After you have all this yarn, you have to do something with it. And I have lots of yarn. So I wove several blankets, but this is mostly hand spun yarn that I've dyed, that I've spun and spun and spun.
You get it from local sources?
Some of it, yes, and for some reason, people keep giving it to me. I swear, I must have a bumper sticker that says, "Give this woman fleece." We had somebody call and say, we have some alpaca fleece. Would your guild be interested? 4 or 5 cars later, we had an amazing amount of alpaca fiber. And so, you have to spin it and spin it and spin it. And by the way, you don't need a spinning wheel to spin. There's something called a drop spindle, and I wish I had brought them. You can stick a stick in a CD player and spin it, and with a stick on it, and you can spin with that. You could also stick in an apple or a potato and spin. So you don't need a spinning wheel to spin, and it's a lot of fun.
We have one of our guild members who was given, about 6 garbage bags full of a wool, and it was a kind of wool that she loved. And she doesn't have a spinning wheel. She only does the drop spindle. So she spent months cleaning this wool and getting all the tangles out, what we call carding it. And now she's spinning it, and then she'll knit it into something.
It's lots of fun to do, and it's very simple. I'll pass this around. This is heavy, but it was like only 8 threads to the inch when I wove it on the loom. And I did wash it in the washing machine because it, you know, after you weave it, sometimes it's sort of stiff. And the washing, ungentle, makes it a much, much softer. So it's a kind of a fun thing to do. And I think I've woven about 15 or 16 of those, and I still have more hand-spun yarn to go.
Marty talked me into, I hadn't woven blankets in years, so one of the COVID projects, she talked me into blankets, so I wove 2 blankets in natural colors and 2 in kind of purples and blues, and then I went, okay, I'm done. I've gotten that out of my system.
But for some reason, weavers have a large stash. And as we get older, we want to get rid of the stash. So that's a stash buster. It gets rid of a lot of yarn. And all of my relatives now have an Afghan. So
Would you hold it to me for a minute? I wanted to show you, we also do a lot of surface design. I've already taught 1 class here, and I have 2 classes coming up. One is this coming Monday, and there's still openings in it. And that will be 2 techniques. One is shibori, which is a Japanese technique. It's a rashi shibori, which means rain. And the other one will be painting with dye and using salt. Can you hold this? So here's the one was painted, and can you see all the little kind of splotchy areas? That's where the salt hit the dye when it's wet, and the salt sucks up some of the dye and the moisture. And you can get some great looks with this. And then the shibori, I have PVC pipes, and we will be wrapping the silk around the pipe and then scrunching it up and then dyeing it. And I've always said it kind of looks like a zebra stripe, but it can give some beautiful effects. And what's nice is no 2 are ever alike. They're really wonderful. And then on April 4th, yes?
Yep.
April 4th, I'll be doing turn my hand. April 4th, I'll be doing another one using bleed tissue. So there's this great tissue paper that has dye in it. And when you lay out pieces of the tissue on the silk and then you wet it
with vinegar.
With vinegar and water, the color from the tissue goes onto the silk. And so these were just some samples that I did to show what you can do. I wanted to play around to see how well cut out shapes would translate onto it and how much they would bleed. This I thought was kind of fun. I just took a bunch of colors and cut little tiny scraps and just like confetti, threw them onto the silk. So we'll be doing that on April 4th, and there's still space available in those classes. We'll be doing 2 scarves at each of these workshops. There's a lot more that we could show on the tables, but maybe you might like to see how weaving works. I'll let Marty go to the loom. Wait. Here, let's hook it on to you. We're gonna get technical here. Okay. Okay.
This is a 4-harness loom. It's a floor loom. You can also get table looms, and I have 2 table looms that I love because 1, I can pick them up and take them places. If I go to a workshop, they're easy and they're portable. But this has 4 harnesses, It also has multiple treadles down here. And it's like playing an organ that you step on a treadle and it raises the harnesses. And I think that just raised 1 and 3.
Stick it in your waist.
Okay, just. Well, anyway, that didn't work. This is called a shuttle, and there are many different types of shuttles. And this is for rag rugs and rags. It holds quite a bit. You step on the treadle, and I think I have to tighten that a little bit, and then just push. Oh, my nose is starting to run. Oh. And that's the way it works. I have to blow my nose. These are harnesses that raise and lower the threads. And when you warp the loom, each thread goes through a harness. And this is just warped 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you tie it up under here, and you can, it's like you have 4 musical notes. You can get different melodies by treadling different threads. And that's the way this one works. It's just, thank you. Also, weaving sometimes creates dust. So quite often when I weave rag rugs, I will wear a mask because weavers used to get brown lungs disease. And if you weave a lot of things with fiber, you don't want to be breathing that dust. When I prepare rags for weaving, I don't rip them unless it's outside because that creates dust. I'll rip them outside, but inside I cut them or I use a roller. So any questions? Okay.
They're in a limited time frame, so that's why there's a little transition.
Okay, fine. Any questions real quickly?
Do you guys have any questions before you guys start walking around? So would you, before they walk away, would you just, before you explain that other project, can you explain how this is something that the community can engage in if they wanted to stop?
Yes, we're going to be posting probably through the Crooked Tree certain hours that people can come in and learn to weave or to weave on this. And that's something we have to discuss and set up a schedule.
Yeah.
But I hope some of the members of our guild will be able to come in. I'm going to commit to a few times a month. Again, I have to look at my calendar. So, and then we're going to have people coming in working on the sample guild as a drop-in basis when you're open. And I don't have a schedule for that.
Right.
Hopefully.
We want this loom that Marty's standing at to be a loom that the community can engage in. And we may not be brave enough to invest in a loom. So this is a great opportunity to come and try it. I'm raising my hand because that's me. And yeah, and we might get some new weavers out of this.
Well, hopefully. And we want young people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Many of our weaving community is getting a little older. And so we want to encourage young people to take up the craft. We didn't mention, there is a basketry guild in Traverse City who they do a wonderful job. But our guild also through the years have done some basketry projects. We did a felted basket. We also did the birch bark basket. And that was really fun and very interesting. So we do some basketry. We are also working on 2 quilt block projects that our members put the quilts together and give to emergency people who give them to victims of fires and accidents. And we're currently working on these 2 projects by just making squares and then putting the squares together in sort of a railroad fashion. And that's a fun thing to do too. So we try to do something with a community outreach program every year. And that's what we're working on with the quilting projects. So any questions? Well, thank you for being such a great audience.
Can you talk a little bit about the project that you're doing back on the other?
Okay. The Michigan League does the samples, and this is a more complicated loom. It has 8 harnesses. We're using 6 harnesses for the samples that we're doing. We are also using 2 colors of thread or yarn. One is a wool and one is a synthetic. And it's just 6 treadles that we're using that are set up. So it's basically treadle 1, treadle 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's not complicated, hopefully. So that's it for me.
So were there any online questions?
I just, you can ask, because you got the mic, I just typed it in and no one has asked any questions. Oh, you have a question right here?
On the treadles, if you change where the strings are tied, does that change the actual, like the design of it?
Yeah, yes.
So you're talking about down here?
Yeah.
Yes. So, right. So right now, when we push one, it's taking every other thread up, but conceivably we could tie it up so that it maybe just takes 1 harness up, or it could take 3 up. It depends on what you're going to weave. And there are lots of books that have lots of patterns that can direct you into things like that.
And this is done on a loom just like this. It's called Cat's Paws and Snail's Trail. And
Why don't you say it again?
Cat's Paws and Snail's Trails. It's also called Wandering Vine. It's a traditional pattern. And it's all the way you string the loom and the way you treadle. But it's fun. I mean, it's very traditional, lots of fun. This is a more complicated weave done on an 8 harness loom. And again, it's all in how you treadle, how you use color, and how you string up the loom. And it's kind of fun figuring out how to make figures. That's one of my, I like figuring out how to make, everything from hearts to Christmas trees. And I like to dye the warp because it gives it some more interest in color. Yeah, but hearts and Christmas trees, I've done Santa Clauses and all sorts of things with weaving on the 8 harness loom.
So Marty, you said these were about 8 threads to the inch?
This is 16 threads to the
Oh, okay.
My blanket was 8 threads.
Okay. So, and something like this might be more like 20, 24.
24 threads to the inch.
So the finer the weave, the more threads you need to the inch. If you're doing something really heavy, you might have less warp threads. And Marty loves doing dish towels and towels. Me, not so much.
Well, it can also be scarves.
Yeah.
This is the same work that I probably did something like this. You know, if you put on 10 yards, you have a lot of time to experiment. And I always like to experiment too. That's part of the fun of doing the weaving. So, yes.
So when you experiment, can you undo your experiment if you didn't like what you?
Or you just go beyond and forget. Well, they become the kitchen towels that I use. This is another weave structure that was just fun to do. I don't remember the name of it, but you can use up lots of yarn scraps. And this, it was just a stripe and just joyous. Lots of fun. So
There's always something that we can do with the things that don't work. I didn't bring it, but I had woven some scarves that turned out to be pretty dull and ugly. And I like doing what's called snow dyeing or ice dyeing. And you cover whatever you're doing with snow or ice and sprinkle some of the dye powder on and let it melt, and they flow together. And I recently took one of those and over dyed it, and it's now gorgeous. So there's always ways to repair by over dyeing, or you can do what's called discharge and take dye away and then over dye to correct something you just didn't quite like.
and that, you know, there's something like a book bag or a little carry-all bag. This is the Inka Loom band, which I used here. And then I used up some of the beads and other things. Again, I dyed this. As you can see, the warp is just not boring white or something. And I always think that finishing things off, that's part of craftsmanship. The inside should look just about as nice as the outside. And if you enter shows, the judges look at the outside and they're looking at the inside in the way you finish things. So
That's gorgeous.
this is lots of fun.
I think the only thing that I didn't show yes, but a lot of us like to do felting. And so one of my life goals was to take a workshop from a woman named Chad Alice Hagan out of North Carolina. So I got to. So, I mean, this started out as raw wool and first felted a piece, and then similar to that woven shibori, but this was done over under with a needle and then dyed a couple of times. First dyed the blue and then gathered and then dyed the purple. So we had so much fun. And then she also taught us, she calls this the hairy fairy scarf. So it was laying out pieces of raw wool and then very gently agitating and agitating until they began to felt and making this kind of fun scarf. So it's amazing what, you know, you don't think what a sheep can provide, but using the raw wool and then coming up with something really neat.
By the way, our guild is having 2 workshops, one this summer in July on, let's see, that book, do I have it? The workshop in July is by Noni, and she's going to be doing a book or a bag and some flowers felted. We are also having a workshop in September on deflected double weave, which is more complicated, and it will be on a loom workshop.
Oh, nice.
So
I don't have any questions. I'm wondering, would, if any of the students wanted to
They're welcome to,
Closer, would that be okay?
oh, yes.
Okay, so if you guys want to go check this out, go ahead. And I will sign off with our friends that are online. Today, I will add some links to, the listening to this recording on our website. It should be on the website the next day or two. It's gonna be under the online copy of sentence. And I'll add some links so that you can find video and get more information about their workshops. Like I said, once you come in, and look at some news that we have here. One is where the community can engage, and one will be for guild members that are doing the project, and then we can take a look at our show. And as Terry mentioned, I got a town next week. I got a kids day, spring break and things like that. Monday,
Wouldn't tell me you had it 20 years ago.
That's
Oh, you had
488.
through the.
And we'd love to have you come in. So, consider starters. Our spring and summer workshops are on the website, so, I'm going to refurbish them, do that. And let's see, hi Karen, so, Karen was asking a question, so, and I do believe a number of different I asked it. So,
Who I
good to
first
see
met.
everybody, have a great weekend, and come over to you get a chance.
Yeah, so that was early 90s.
Yeah.